The wind howled through the red stone canyon under a merciless Wyoming sun. 3 riders moved slowly into the narrow pass. The first shot cracked from the rim above. The older man lurched in the saddle. Blood bloomed black across his side. Horses screamed. Dust exploded. The woman was already on the ground. Hands that knew the weight of blood pressed hard against the wound. She did not flinch. She did not cry out. Second shot. Third. The bullet kissed the air beside her hair. High on the canyon wall, a shadow shifted. Patient. Exact. Someone was hunting. Not for money. Not for land. A name buried 2 years deep. One brown eye. One pale blue-gray. A man who would burn the world to reclaim what he believed still belonged to him. There was nowhere left to run. The next bullet was already finding its mark. The wind came first. Before the whistle. Before the smoke. Ren Holloway felt it through the floorboards of the passenger car, a low shudder, that meant the train was slowing, which meant Stone Hollow was close, which meant there was no more time to practice the lie in her head. Practical woman. 26 years old. Can work hard. Doesn't complain. For sentences. That was all she'd sent him. For sentences and nothing else. No photograph. No mention of the years before those 4 sentences existed. Because the years before didn't belong to this story. She'd left them on a different platform, 2 states back, folded up small, and buried under everything else in the carpet bag at her feet. She looked down at the bag now. Worn at the corners. Handle stitched twice where it had split. It looked like it had survived something. It had. Wyoming Territory rolled past the window, endless and pale gold. Mountains stacked up blue against the sky like something out of a painting nobody would believe was real. Ren pressed her palm flat against the glass. Cool. Steady. Her hand wasn't shaking. Good. That was good. She needed her hands steady for this. She practiced her new name under her breath. The way she'd practiced it every day for 2 years now. Ren Holloway. Ren Holloway. Say it enough times and it stops sounding borrowed. Say it enough times and maybe it becomes true. Except it wasn't fully true. Because Holloway was the false part. Ren was the only piece of herself she'd kept. The conductor called the stop. Stone Hollow. Last stop before the line ran out. Into nothing but grass and sky. She stood. Smoothed her skirt. Told herself one more time that this was simple. A rancher needed a wife. She needed a place the world couldn't find her. 2 problems. 1 solution. Nothing more complicated than that. Except her heart was pounding like it knew better. Because what if he took one look at her and changed his mind? What if the eyes gave her away before she'd even said a word? People stared. They always stared. 1 brown eye, 1 pale blue-gray, like God had started painting her and gotten interrupted halfway through. Back east, in the life she used to have, the eyes had been called striking. A conversation piece. Something to be admired at a dinner table under crystal light. Out here, in a territory, where everyone was already suspicious of a mail-order bride who'd sent no photograph, those eyes might just look like something to be afraid of. She stepped down onto the platform. Sun hit her like a slap. Dry heat, nothing like home. Nothing like anything she used to know. And there he was. She knew him instantly, didn't need anyone to point him out. Tall, broad through the shoulders in the particular way of men who'd spent their whole lives lifting things other men would need a rope and a mule for. Hat pulled low, standing very still at the edge of the platform, the way a man stands when he's trying very hard not to look like he's waiting for something that terrifies him. Good, she thought. He's scared too. That helped, somehow. Not much, but some. She didn't search the crowd, didn't scan faces the way the other passengers were doing, calling out names, waving handkerchiefs. She walked straight toward him, because she already knew, because some part of her, some old animal instinct sharpened by years of learning to read a room, before it turned dangerous, had already picked him out of the crowd, before her boots even touched the platform. He watched her come, and she watched him watching. His jaw tightened when he saw her eyes. There it is, she thought. There's the look. Except it wasn't the look she expected. Not disgust. Not fear. just surprise. And under the surprise, something quieter. Something almost gentle. "Mr. Calloway," she said. His name felt strange in her mouth. All names felt strange lately. She'd worn so many. "Miss Halloway," he said. Not a question either. Just a fact laid down between them like a stone. 2 hours earlier, on the other side of that same platform, Holt Calloway had been standing in almost the exact same spot for almost the exact same reason. Except his fear ran a different direction. He wasn't afraid she'd reject him. He was afraid of what he'd done to her by asking her here at all. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? He'd placed an advertisement like a man ordering seed for spring planting. Rancher, land, livestock, practical woman needed. He'd read it back to himself a dozen times before mailing it and felt like a fool every single time. And now some woman he'd never laid eyes on was riding a train across half the territory because of 4 sentences he'd scrawled at his kitchen table, with a whiskey glass sweating a ring, into the wood beside him. What if she hated the ranch? What if she took one look at the house and turned right back around? What if, and this was the thought that kept circling back no matter how hard he tried to kick it out of his head, what if she'd already heard about his family before she ever got on that train and she was walking into this the way you walk into a burning barn? Eyes open, knowing exactly how bad it could get. Big day, Calloway. He didn't need to turn around. He knew that voice the way you know a splinter you've been carrying too long. Nathaniel Pruitt, general store owner, collector of other people's business like it was something he could trade for credit at his own counter. "Pruitt," Holt said. Flat, not turning. "Heard your bride's coming in on the noon train." Pruitt stepped up beside him, thumbs hooked into his vest like he was settling in for a show. "Whole town's curious. Woman willing to marry sight unseen into your family. Must be desperate." Holt's jaw worked. "None of your business. Just saying what folks are thinking." "Then folks should keep thinking it quietly." Pruitt's grin didn't move. "Your family's got a reputation, Calloway. After what your brother did." Finish that sentence. Pruitt held up both hands, still grinning. "Touchy. Understood." He tipped his hat and ambled off, and Holt could feel the man's amusement following him like smoke. That wouldn't clear. The truth was, Pruitt wasn't wrong. That was the part that stuck in Holt's chest like a fishhook. Because his father had built this ranch out of stubbornness and meanness in equal measure, making enemies faster than friends. Because his younger brother Emmett had gotten tangled up in a land scheme that left 2 men dead in a ditch outside town, and then run off before the dust even settled, leaving Holt to clean up wreckage that wasn't his to clean. 5 years now. 5 years of paying off debts that weren't his. 5 years of keeping his head down, working the land, until his hands split, trying to prove the Calloway name still meant something besides tragedy. And still, no decent woman in 3 counties would come near him, which was the whole reason he was standing on this platform at all. Silas Rourke had cornered him in the barn one gray morning back in the spring, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, and said it plain the way Silas said everything. "Boss, you're 34. This ranch is falling apart because you're trying to run it alone. And every woman in 3 counties won't touch you because of what happened with your brother. You need a partner." Holt had argued. Silas had outlasted the argument the way he always did. So Holt wrote the letter. 6 women wrote back. 5 of them wrote pages. Flowery talk of fresh starts, of dreams, of a woman's tender heart finding its true home on the frontier. The kind of language that made his molars ache just reading it. Then there was Wren Halloway's letter. For sentences. No flourishes. No dreams mentioned at all. Something about that last line had stuck behind his ribs and never quite worked loose. "I need a place to be. Not a home. Not a future. Just a place." Like she wasn't asking for anything more than the world already owed her, which was nothing. He'd written back that same night. Now here she was, stepping down off the train, into brutal Wyoming sun, and Holt Calloway found he couldn't remember how to breathe properly. She was smaller than he'd pictured, thin in the way that spoke of missed meals rather than fashion. Dark dress, mended more than once at the seams. One carpet bag that looked like it had been through a war and lost more than it won. And then she looked up, and he saw the eyes. One brown, one pale, startling blue-gray. He'd seen that kind of thing once in a cattle dog, never in a person. She walked toward him without hesitation. No searching the crowd, no confusion, like she already knew exactly where to find him. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Miss Halloway." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Train ride all right?" It was a train. He almost smiled. Almost. "Thank you for meeting me," she added, quieter. "Figured it was the least I could do." He reached for her bag. She pulled it back before his hand closed on the handle. Not sharp, not aggressive, just firm, like a door closing on a hinge that had been oiled 100 times before. "I can carry it. It's not heavy." He let his hand fall back to his side. Filed that away. She doesn't want help. Not even with a bag. An awkward silence settled between them, thick as the August heat. Holt had never been good at small talk on his best day, and this woman didn't seem inclined to fill the gap for him. "Right," he said finally. "Well, welcome to Stone Hollow, I guess. It's not much." "I don't need much." Behind them, Pruitt's laugh cracked across the platform like a whip. Holt didn't turn. Didn't need to. He already knew the man was holding court somewhere behind him, telling whoever would listen exactly what he thought of a stranger marrying into the Calloway name. "Wagons this way," Holt said, and started walking, before the silence could grow teeth. She fell into step beside him without a word, and Holt noticed the way a man notices small things when he's too nervous to say anything bigger, that she moved with an economy that struck him as almost military. No wasted steps, no fidgeting, like she'd learned somewhere, the hard way, that stillness kept you safer than motion ever could. As they neared the wagon, a figure came out of the general store across the street. Silas Rourke, 60 years old, and bow-legged from 4 decades in the saddle. A face like old leather, and eyes that missed nothing worth catching. He'd been buying flour, and he set the sack down the moment he saw them. "This her?" Silas asked, studying Wren with open curiosity that somehow didn't feel rude. "Silas Rourke, my foreman," Holt said. "Silas, this is Wren Halloway, my wife." The word felt strange leaving his mouth. Wife. They weren't married yet. Not until tomorrow morning at the courthouse. But it was already true in every way that mattered, and both of them knew it. Silas pulled off his hat. "Ma'am, welcome to the outfit." "Thank you," Wren said. She was studying him the same way she'd studied Holt. Cataloging, reading, filing him somewhere. "We treating you right so far?" Silas asked, and there was something protective in the question that surprised Holt a little. "Yes," Wren said simply. "Good, because if the boss here gives you trouble, you come find me. I've known him since he was in diapers. Know where all the skeletons are buried." The corner of Wren's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "Close. I'll remember that." Silas waved them off and headed back toward the store, and Holt helped Wren up into the wagon. She took his hand this time, grip stronger than he expected. He climbed up beside her and clicked his tongue, and the horses pulled them away, from the depot, out onto the dusty main street of a town that was barely a town at all. They rode in silence. He kept stealing glances at her, trying to solve a riddle he didn't have the pieces for. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape unspool past the wagon, with no expression he could name. If she was scared, if she was having second thoughts, nothing showed. Finally, he couldn't take the quiet anymore. "You don't talk much." "No." "That a problem where you're from?" "Sometimes." He waited. She didn't elaborate. "Look," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "I'm not good at conversation, social things, but we're about to be married. Figured we should at least try to." "Why did you send for a wife?" The question landed so directly it nearly knocked the breath out of him. "I told you in the letter. Ranch needs help. I need a partner. You need someone to cook and clean. I need someone who can handle ranch life, Rest of it, cooking, cleaning, that's part of it. But mainly I need someone who won't break the first time things get hard. He glanced at her. Your letter said you could work hard. Didn't complain. That true? Yes. Then we'll get along fine. A pause. Then, quiet. What happened with your brother? His hands tightened on the reins. Because of course. Because Pruitt would have made sure she heard something before she'd even stepped off the platform. Folks been talking already. The man at the depot. He made certain I heard him say I must be desperate to marry into your family. Of course he had. Holt swore under his breath. My brother made some bad choices, he said finally. Got involved in things he shouldn't have. People got hurt. He ran. Left me to clean up the mess. That's all you need to know. Will he come back? No. You sound certain. I am. She accepted this without pushing further, which surprised him more than any question could have. Most people wanted the whole story, wanted to dig their fingers into the wound and see how deep it went. Wren just nodded once and turned back to the window. They were clear of town now. Open grassland stretching toward the mountains, sage dotting the plains, the sky so wide it felt like a person could fall right up into it. You ever been to Wyoming Territory before? Holt asked. No. It's different than back east. Harder. You have to be tough to survive it. I'm tough. She said it the way you'd state the color of the sky. Not a boast. A fact. He believed her. Something in the way she carried herself. Something in the calluses he'd noticed on her hands when she took his in front of the wagon. Told him she'd already survived things most people back east couldn't imagine. Where you from originally? He asked. Pause, longer this time. East. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving. He looked at her sharply. She met his eyes without flinching. We're about to be married, he said. I think I've got a right to know. You have a right to a wife who works hard and doesn't complain. Wren cut in, her voice still quiet, but with something underneath it now. Steele, maybe. You have a right to someone who won't run when things get difficult. That's what I agreed to. You didn't ask for my life story in your letter, Mr. Calloway. You asked for a practical woman. I'm here. I'm practical. That's what you're getting. They stared at each other a long moment. Something shifted in the space between them. A boundary drawn clean and hard. She was right, in a way. He'd asked for a transaction, not a confession. Fair enough, he said finally, turning back to the road. But it's Holt, not Mr. Calloway. We're past formal, I think. Holt. She tested the name, quiet. Then softer. Thank you for sending for me, for giving me somewhere to go. The gratitude in her voice landed harder than the earlier bluntness had. It made him wonder, really wonder, for the first time, with something colder than curiosity, what she was running from. What she was, so grateful to escape, that she'd marry a stranger in the middle of nowhere, without so much as a photograph exchanged. But he didn't ask. She'd drawn her line. He'd respect it. For now. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. 3,000 acres of grassland, and timber running up against the foothills. The main house sat in a shallow valley, a creek cutting. Through it, a 2-story structure built from timber and river rock. Solid, plain, a working ranch, not a showpiece. Wren studied it the way she studied everything. Careful, assessing, giving nothing away. It's big, she said finally. 3,000 acres. About 500 head of cattle. For hands plus Silas. It's a lot of work. I'm not afraid of work. So you keep saying. He pulled the wagon up in front of the house. 2 men were working nearby, mending fence. They straightened when they saw the wagon. Tobias Raphael, Holt said, helping Wren down. This is Wren Halloway. We're getting married tomorrow, so she's the new boss lady. Treat her accordingly. Both men pulled off their hats. Tobias, 20, lanky, red hair, perpetual sunburn, grinned wide. Ma'am, welcome to the circus. Raphael, older and quieter, just nodded. Senora. Thank you, Ren said, acknowledging them both. Then, before Holt could say anything else, Tobias, you finished that fence. Raphael, let Silas know we're back. Both men blinked at her, then at Holt. Holt bit down a laugh. You heard the boss lady. They went back to work, though Holt could feel their eyes following, as he led Ren toward the house. The front door opened, into one large room, kitchen and dining, and living space all crowded together under a single roof. Clean, Spartan. A table, chairs, a cast iron stove, furniture built by men for men, with no thought given to softness. It's not much, Holt said, seeing it suddenly, through her eyes, and feeling something inadequate crawl up the back of his neck. My mother had it fixed up nicer, back when she was alive. After she passed and then Emmett left, it's just been me and Silas. We keep it clean enough. But it's fine. Ren set down her bag, walked slowly through the room, running her hand along the back of a chair, taking in everything with that same steady focus. Where do I sleep? The question landed direct as a fist. Upstairs. 3 bedrooms. The big one at the end was my parents'. It's yours now. I'm in the one on the right. Other one's empty. Used to be my brother's. I cleared it out. She nodded. I'd like to see it. He showed her up. The master bedroom was large, windows facing east and south. A bed his father had built by hand. Like everything else in the house, clean but bare. His mother's things had been packed away years ago. Ren walked to the window, looked out at the ranch spread below, gold light pooling across the valley. It's beautiful, she said, and for the first time he heard something real in her voice, something unguarded. Yeah, he agreed. It is. When it's not trying to kill you. She turned to face him. They were alone now, in what would tomorrow become their bedroom, and the reality of it hit Holt like a fist to the ribs. Tomorrow they'd be married. This would be their room, their bed. He barely knew this woman. She barely knew him. And yet, we should discuss expectations, Ren said, her voice returning to that practical register. All right, I'll keep the house. Cook, clean, mend. I can help with ranch work too if you need it. I've worked with animals before. What kind of animals? Different kinds. Another non-answer. He was starting to notice a pattern. And the rest of it? He asked. She held his gaze steady. You mean the marriage bed? Heat crawled up his neck. Yeah, that. I understand it's part of the arrangement. I won't refuse you, but I'd ask for time. To adjust. To know you better. Relief flooded through him. Fast and unexpected. That's fine. More than fine. I'm not. This isn't. He fumbled for the words. I'm not looking to force anything. We can take things slow. As slow as you need. Something in her expression softened. Just barely. Thank you. You keep thanking me for being basically decent, he said. Makes me wonder what kind of men you've known. Her face closed off instantly. Walls slamming back into place, fast enough to make him flinch. That's my business. Right? Sorry. Didn't mean to pry. An awkward silence filled the room. He cleared his throat. I'll let you get settled. Dinner's in about an hour. Nothing fancy. Steaks and potatoes. He headed for the door. Paused. Ren? Yes. I know this is strange. All of it. But I meant what I said in my letter. I need a partner. Someone I can count on. If you can be that, we'll make this work. And I'll do my best to be a decent husband. Not perfect, but decent. She studied him for a long moment, those mismatched eyes searching his face for something. That's all I'm asking for, she said finally. Decent. Dinner was quiet. Silas joined them at the table, the way he'd been doing, since before Holt was born, and tried a few times to draw Ren into conversation. Asked about her trip, commented on the weather, got mostly single-word answers in return. Eventually he gave up and focused on his food. Afterward, Ren insisted on cleaning up alone. Holt and Silas took their coffee out to the porch, and the sun finished dying behind the mountains in long orange streaks. "Well?" Silas asked. "I think she's tougher than she looks." "That's not what I asked." Holt sipped his coffee. "I think she's running from something. I think she's got secrets that would probably scare me if I knew them. And I think she's exactly what I asked for. Practical. Hardworking. No nonsense." "You attracted to her?" The question caught him off guard. "Silas. Fair question. You're about to marry her." Holt thought about it honestly. Wren wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. Too thin. Too severe. Too marked by whatever she'd survived. But there was something compelling in the way she moved. The intensity behind those eyes that seemed to see straight through everything they landed on. "I could be," he admitted. "Given time. And her? Think she could be attracted to you?" "Hell if I know. Woman's a locked box." Silas chuckled. "Well, you did ask for no poets and no dreamers. Can't complain now that you got exactly that." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled full over the ranch. Lights flickered on in the bunkhouse. Somewhere out in the grass, a coyote called and went quiet. From inside, Holt heard the sounds of Wren moving through the kitchen, washing dishes, putting things away, domestic sounds, the sound of someone making a space their own, even if she didn't quite believe yet that she was allowed to. "You nervous about tomorrow?" Silas asked. "Getting married in front of Judge Renner doesn't scare me." "That's not what I asked." Holt looked at his foreman. This man who'd been a constant in his life since before he could remember. "Yeah," he admitted. "I'm nervous. Bringing a complete stranger into my home. My life. My bed, eventually. Don't know what she's running from. Don't know if it'll follow her here. Don't know if I'm making a huge mistake." "But you're doing it anyway." "But I'm doing it anyway." Silas nodded slowly. "Your daddy used to say the only way to know if you're making a mistake is to make it and see what happens. My daddy also died broke and bitter with more enemies than friends." "True, but he built this ranch from nothing. Sometimes you got to take risks to build something worth having." Holt couldn't argue with that. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Holt found Wren already in the kitchen, dressed and ready, coffee made, scrambling eggs like she'd been doing it for years. "You didn't have to do this." "I told you. Starting tomorrow, I'm awake. Might as well be useful." They ate in silence. Rode into town after, Silas following on horseback. The courthouse wedding took exactly 3 minutes. Judge Renner read, from a book worn soft at the edges, his voice flat, with the boredom of a man who'd seen every kind of frontier marriage there was: shotgun weddings, marriages of convenience, old desperation dressed up as young love. "Do you, Holt Calloway, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Wren Halloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" A pause. Holt's heart stuttered in his chest. "I do. By the power vested in me by Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride if you're so inclined." Holt looked at her. She looked back, expression unreadable. He leaned in slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips touched, brief and awkward. First time they'd touched beyond a hand offered up, into a wagon. And just like that, it was done. Silas signed as witness. Wren signed the certificate in neat, careful handwriting, though her hand shook slightly on the pen. The only sign of nerves she'd shown all morning. Back at the ranch, life folded into a new rhythm. Wren took over the house completely, and Holt had to admit, she was good at it. Meals appeared hot and on time. The house stayed clean. She started mending the old curtains his mother had sewn years ago, bringing back color and life to rooms that had gone gray with neglect. But she remained a mystery, never mentioned family, never mentioned friends, polite but distant with the hands. At night she disappeared behind her door and closed it, and Holt learned not to knock. A week passed this way, then 2. He found himself growing frustrated with the distance, even though he'd agreed to it. He'd watch her working in the kitchen and want to talk, really talk, get past the walls she'd built brick by brick, and every time he tried, she'd deflect. Give a minimal answer. Walk away. It was Silas who finally said something. They were in the barn mending tack. You two planning to actually be married at some point? Or are you just going to keep circling each other like nervous dogs? Holt looked up sharply. The hell's that supposed to mean? Means I got eyes. You watch her like you're trying to solve a puzzle. She watches you like she's waiting for you to turn into something dangerous. Neither of you talks about anything that matters. That ain't a marriage, boss. That's a standoff. She needs time. It's been 2 weeks. At some point, one of you has to make a move. Holt threw down the bridle he'd been working. What do you want me to do, Silas? Force myself into her room? Demand she tell me her secrets? I'm trying to be patient. I'm not talking about the bedroom, and you know it. I'm talking about trust, partnership, the thing you said you needed when you sent for her. Silas fixed him with a level stare. You're scared of her. That's ridiculous. Is it? She's got you off balance. You don't know how to handle her, because she's not like anyone you've ever met. So you're keeping your distance, hoping eventually she'll come to you. But here's the thing, Holt. That woman's been hurt. Bad. I don't know how or by who, but I can see it in the way she moves. The way she never quite relaxes. She's not going to come to you. You have to go to her. Holt wanted to argue, couldn't, because Silas was right. What if I make it worse? He asked quietly. What if you make it better? That night he knocked on her door. No answer. He knocked again. Ren, can we talk? A long pause. Then the door opened. She stood there in her nightgown, hair down for the first time since he'd met her, and it made her look younger, more vulnerable. Is something wrong? No. Can I come in? We need to talk. She hesitated, then stepped back, letting him in. What do you want to talk about? This isn't working, he said. Her face went carefully blank. I'm sorry if my work isn't satisfactory. I can. No, that's not what I mean. Your work is fine. Better than fine. The house has never been cleaner. The food's better than anything I've had in years. And he struggled for the words. You're doing everything right except we're not actually married. We're just two people living in the same house, being polite to each other. That's what you asked for. Practical arrangement. I asked for a partner, someone I could count on. You can't count on someone you don't know. And I don't know you at all, Ren. You don't know me. We're strangers. We agreed I didn't have to tell you about my past. I'm not asking about your past. I'm asking about right now, today, this moment. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. I'm asking if you're all right, if there's anything you need. I'm asking if this, he gestured between them, is ever going to be more than two people sharing a house. She stared at him for a long moment, and something flickered in those mismatched eyes. Fear, maybe, or longing, maybe both. I don't know how to do this, she said finally, voice so quiet he almost missed it. Do what? Be someone's wife. Be close to someone. It's been a long time since I let anyone. She stopped herself, shook her head. I'm trying. I don't know how. The admission cost her something. He could see it, the way her hands clenched, the way her shoulders locked tight. This woman who faced everything, with such flat, practical calm, terrified of something, as simple as another human being close by. Then we'll figure it out together, Holt said. Little by little. Start with small things. Coffee together in the morning. Talk about the day. Share meals. Actually look at each other instead of around each other. And if I can't, if I'm too broken to, you're not broken. He said it with certainty. Hurt maybe, scarred, but not broken. Broken things don't work. You work just fine. A sound escaped her, half laugh, half something else. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes had gone wet. Hey, he said softly. It's okay. We'll take it slow. As slow as you need. But we have to at least try. Otherwise, what's the point? She nodded, unable to speak. Starting tomorrow, Holt said. We have coffee together every morning before I head out. 15 minutes. We talk about anything. Can you do that? Yes, she whispered. Good. That's good. He turned toward the door. Paused. Ren, thank you for trying. He left her alone, closing the door softly behind him. True to her word, Ren was at the table the next morning. 2 cups already poured, dawn light spilling gray, and gold across the wood. They sat across from each other and talked. Nothing deep. He told her about the herd they'd be moving to new pasture. Mentioned a mare due to foal soon. Complained about a fence line that needed mending. She listened, asked questions, offered small observations of her own. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The mornings kept coming. 15 minutes at a time, they built something out of nothing. She began to relax by degrees, a fraction at a time, the way ice thaws at the edges before it ever cracks through the middle. Once, she made a joke, dry, unexpected, and it caught him, so off guard he laughed out loud, and something in her face changed when she heard it. Surprised at herself. Surprised the sound had come out of her at all. He learned small things, that she loved the mountains, that she'd get up before dawn sometimes just to watch the sun break over the ridgeline, that she had a gift with animals, the barn cats, that avoided everyone else would curl up against her ankles, and the chickens followed her around the yard like she was something they trusted, without being told to. But she still didn't talk about the years before Stone Hollow, and Holt still didn't ask. Not directly, not yet. It was almost 3 weeks into the marriage when the slip happened. Small, barely anything, the kind of thing a less careful man might not have noticed at all. They were on the porch after dinner, the mountains going purple in the last light, and Holt mentioned that Pruitt had been asking around about her again in town. Wondering out loud, in that particular tone of his, where a woman with no family and no photograph might have come from. Ren's hands went still around her coffee cup. He'll never think to look for me under this name, she said, quiet, almost to herself, like the sentence had slipped out sideways before she could catch it. Then her face changed. Fast, like a door slamming. What did you say? Holt asked carefully. Nothing. She stood, too quickly, coffee sloshing over the rim of the cup. I should check on the bread. Ren. It's nothing, Holt. She was gone, before he could say anything else, the screen door clapping shut behind her. He sat there a long time after that, turning it over. He'll never think to look for me under this name. Not I'll never see him again. Not I got away from a bad marriage, the way she'd let him assume, without ever quite saying. He, a specific he, a he who was still out there, a he who was apparently someone with the means and the will to look, because a woman didn't build a whole new name unless the old one was still dangerous to wear. And she'd said find, not miss, not forget, find, which meant this wasn't just a woman escaping hard times, which meant somebody was still hunting. He didn't sleep well that night, kept turning the sentence over and over, trying to find an innocent shape to fit it into, and failing every time. The weeks that followed brought a new complication, one that had nothing to do with secrets and everything to do with 1,600 pounds of pure black rage. Silas had bought the stallion at auction the month before, a beautiful animal, good lines, young enough to gentle and sell on for a fine profit. Except the horse had turned out to be something closer to a demon wearing a horse's shape, screaming and slamming itself against the stall walls at the faintest sound of a boot in the barn aisle, biting at anything that came near. The men had started calling him Onyx, half out of admiration for the coat, and half because nobody wanted to get close enough to name him something friendlier. It was Raphael, who nearly lost a hand to him one hot afternoon, reaching in to check a hoof the horse hadn't wanted checked. He came stumbling out of the stall, clutching his forearm, blood soaking through his sleeve, cursing in 2 languages at once. That's it, Silas said, jaw tight, watching Tobias wrap the wound. We cut our losses. Sell him to the meat buyers before he kills somebody. No. Wren's voice came from the barn doorway. She'd been in the middle of hanging wash, and still had a clothespin caught between two fingers, and she was already walking toward them, before anyone could stop her. Wren, this horse is dangerous, Holt started. I know. I can hear him from the house. She was still walking. Don't sell him. That animal's mean as a snake, Silas said. He's terrified. Her voice was flat, and certain in a way Holt hadn't heard from her before. Not since the wedding. Fear makes things vicious. Let me try with him. Every instinct in Holt's body said no. Said absolutely not after what just happened to Raphael. Not with a horse that size, not with a woman he was only beginning to trust with the truth of anything. But something in her face stopped the word in his throat. She looked more alive standing in front of that stall than he'd seen her look in 3 weeks of careful, guarded mornings over coffee. All right, he heard himself say. But not today. Let Raphael's arm heal first. And when you do go in, I'm right there. First sign of trouble, we pull you out. Agreed. She didn't go near the stall again that afternoon. Just stood at a safe distance for a long while, watching the horse throw himself against the boards, murmuring something too low for Holt to catch. And the strangest thing happened, the thing that made the hair rise on the back of Holt's neck. The horse quieted. Just a little. Just enough to notice. 2 days later, on a Tuesday, that started out no different than any other. A stranger rode into the small mining settlement One Valley, over from Stone Hollow. Nobody at the ranch knew about it yet. Wouldn't know for another day and a half when Pruitt came out with his wagon and his eager, hungry face to deliver the news himself, the way he delivered everything, like a man handing out gifts he'd stolen from someone else's house. But in that settlement, in the dusty little store that served as post office and saloon and gathering place all at once, a well-dressed man with city hands and a city accent was already asking questions. Asking about a woman, 26, maybe 27, traveled alone or nearly alone, might be going by a different name. The one detail he kept coming back to, the one he described with a kind of cold, patient precision that made the store owner uneasy, without quite knowing why. Mismatched eyes. One brown, one pale blue-gray. He said he was looking for his sister. He was lying, and 2 valleys away, in a kitchen filled with the smell of fresh bread, Wren Halloway went suddenly still at the table, coffee cup halfway to her lips, though nothing in the room had changed, and nobody had said a single word. She just knew, the way a deer knows sometimes a full breath before the shot. The news came riding into Stone Hollow 2 days later, the way bad news always came into Stone Hollow, on the back of Nathaniel Pruitt's wagon, with Nathaniel Pruitt's grin stretched wide and hungry across his face. Wren was hanging wash when she heard the wheels. She didn't turn right away, kept pinning sheets to the line, one after another, because her hands needed something to do, and her mind already knew, somehow, before her ears had caught a single word. Afternoon, Mrs. Calloway. She turned then. Pruitt sat up on his wagon seat like a man delivering good tidings instead of poison. There's a fella over in Copper Draw, he said, not waiting to be asked. City fella. Fine clothes. Asking after a woman. Says she might be going by a false name. The clothespin slipped out of Wren's fingers. Says he's looking for his sister. Pruitt went on, watching her face the whole time like he was reading a book he'd already guessed the ending to. Funny thing, though. Fella like that don't usually spend 3 days and good money asking after a sister he's worried about. Usually he just goes home and waits for a letter. I wouldn't know, Wren said. Her voice came out even, steady. A trick she'd spent years learning, the way other women learn to embroider. No, Pruitt said, and the way he said it made her skin crawl. Suppose you wouldn't. He drove on, and Wren stood there with one hand still raised toward the empty line. Sheet half pinned, heart going so hard against her ribs she thought Pruitt must have heard it, from the road. She didn't tell Holt that night, told herself she would. Sat across from him at supper, with the words stacked up behind her teeth. Ready. And then didn't, because saying it out loud made it real in a way, that whispering it to herself alone in the dark, hadn't quite managed yet. Because if she told him, he'd ask questions. And the questions would lead to more questions. And eventually they'd lead to the one question she wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So she said nothing. Passed the potatoes. Talked about the weather. And upstairs that night, lying rigid in her bed, with her boots set neat beside it, always ready, she stared at the ceiling and thought, he's getting closer. He always gets closer. That's what he does. That's what he's good at. Until she made herself stop. Made herself breathe. Made herself remember that Copper Draw was still 2 valleys away, and 2 valleys was still something. It wasn't much, but it was something. The mornings kept coming anyway. 15 minutes of coffee, then work, then supper, then the porch. Life didn't stop just because fear had moved back in. And it was during one of those mornings, coffee gone lukewarm between them, the sky outside still the color of a fresh bruise, that Wren finally went back to the barn. Raphael's arm had healed enough to bear weight again. The wound closed to an angry pink line he wore like a badge he didn't want. Holt walked with her to the barn, that first morning, rifle in hand, though he kept it low, kept it easy, the way you'd carry something you hoped you wouldn't need. Onyx was waiting. The stallion wheeled the second the barn door groaned open, ears flat, teeth bared, throwing himself against the boards hard enough to rattle the whole structure. Tobias, who'd come to watch from a safe distance, took 2 full steps back, without seeming to notice he'd done it. Jesus, he muttered. That thing's possessed. Wren didn't flinch, walked right up to the stall door, calm as a woman approaching a pot of tea, and rested one hand flat against the wood. Hey, she said, so quiet Holt had to strain to catch it. I know you're scared. The horse screamed, slammed sideways. Straw exploded up in a dust-choked cloud. They're going to kill you if you keep this up, Wren continued, voice never rising, never breaking. They'll sell you for meat, and you'll die scared, and alone and angry. Is that what you want? Onyx pawed the ground, snorted. Didn't charge. Holt's hand tightened on the rifle stock, without him deciding to do it. Or, Wren said, you could let me help you. Let me show you that not everyone wants to hurt you. She reached for the latch. Wren, no. He grabbed her arm, before he'd thought it through, and she turned to look at him, and what he saw in her face stopped him cold. Because it wasn't fear of the horse looking back at him. It was something older, something that had nothing to do with Onyx at all. Please, she said, let me try. Against every instinct he owned, Holt let go of her arm, stepped back. She opened the stall door and walked inside, with the most dangerous animal in the territory, and the door swung shut behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. What followed, Holt would tell people later, though not many people and not often because it sounded like something out of a tall tale even to him, took the better part of 20 minutes and felt like an hour and a half. She stood just inside the door, made herself small, didn't look at the horse directly, gaze soft, pointed somewhere near its shoulder instead of its eyes. I'm not going to hurt you, she murmured. I know you don't believe me. Nobody's given you a reason to believe anything good. But it's true. The horse's ears flicked. Just barely. Just for a second. Holt felt Silas go rigid beside him, though he hadn't heard the old man come up. That mare in the next stall. Wren went on, voice low and even. She had a foal last spring. They sold the foal off to a family up north. Mare cried for 3 days straight. You understand that kind of loss, don't you? Having something torn away from you before you were ready. Her voice caught on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough that Holt heard it, and felt something twist behind his own sternum. I had something taken from me too, she said. Someone I loved, and I couldn't stop it. All I could do was survive, and try not to let the anger eat me alive, from the inside. The barn had gone dead silent except for the stallion's ragged breathing. She took a step forward. The horse's head snapped toward her, a warning, and she froze, waited, then, slower than seemed humanly possible, extended one hand, palm down. I'm asking you to be braver than I was, she whispered. Just enough to let me stand here without trying to kill me. Can you do that? Minutes crawled by. Nobody in that barn dared move. And then, so gradually Holt nearly missed it entirely, the stallion stretched its neck forward and touched its nose to her open palm. The contact lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then the horse jerked back, snorting, furious at its own weakness. But it didn't charge, didn't bite, just stood there, trembling. Good, Wren said, and there were tears in her voice now, unmistakable. That's so good. You're so brave. Braver than me. Later, walking back to the house, with her hands still shaking, from the drop in fear that always came after, Wren would think about that moment and understand something about herself she hadn't quite let herself see before. She hadn't been talking to the horse at all. Not really. 3 weeks became a routine. Morning and evening, Wren went into that stall, and morning and evening, Holt stood outside it, with a rifle he prayed he'd never need to raise. The stallion softened by degrees. 3 days before it let her touch its neck. A week before it stopped baring teeth. 2 weeks before it would eat from her hand without flinching. The hands started gathering to watch. Tobias called it a miracle, straight-faced, like the word cost him nothing. Raphael crossed himself each time and muttered something in Spanish too quiet to translate. Even Silas, who'd broken more horses in 60 years than most men had ever ridden, admitted he'd never seen anything quite like it. She's got a gift, Silas told Holt one evening, the two of them leaning on the corral fence, watching Wren work. Seen plenty of horse breakers in my time. This ain't breaking. This is something else entirely. Holt didn't argue, because he'd started to understand it too. She wasn't dominating that animal. She was healing it. And maybe, somewhere underneath all that careful stillness, healing herself in the process. It was 3 weeks after the first stall visit, the same week Onyx finally let Wren lead him out, into the open corral on a rope, calm as a plow horse, while the hands broke into spontaneous, disbelieving applause, that the two of them sat together on the porch, after dark, and Wren spoke without being asked. I was married before. Holt went very still. She'd never volunteered anything like this. Never opened a door he hadn't already been knocking on for weeks. His name was Edmund, she said, staring out at the black shape of the mountains against a darker sky. Edmund Cross. I married him when I was 21. Thought I was in love. Thought I knew what I wanted. A long pause. I was wrong about everything. Holt didn't speak. Didn't dare. Afraid any sound at all might make her stop. He was charming at first. Kind, even successful. His family had a shipping company back east, and a partner who'd built half of it up alongside him. A man named Weatherford. Older. Decent. The only person in that world who ever treated me like I had a mind of my own. She wrapped her arms around herself. 3 years into the marriage, Weatherford turned up dead. Officially, it was a robbery gone wrong. Officially. And unofficially? Holt asked, very quiet. I found the ledgers. Her voice had gone flat now, controlled in the way she got, when the words were costing her everything to say. Edmund had been moving money out of the company for years, siphoning it into accounts Weatherford didn't know existed. And when Weatherford started asking questions, when he found the discrepancies himself, he ended up dead in an alley 3 blocks from his own house, and the papers called it bad luck. Wren. I confronted him. She said it like a confession. Stupidest thing I've ever done. I told him I knew. I told him I'd seen the numbers. Her hands twisted together in her lap. That was the night he tried to make sure I never told anyone else. Holt's jaw had gone tight enough to ache. He hurt you. He tried to kill me, Holt. She said it plainly. No drama in it, which somehow made it worse. I got away. Barely. I took the real ledger, with me, the proof, the actual numbers in Weatherford's own hand, cross-referenced against Edmund's, and I ran. Sent it somewhere safe before I ever crossed state lines, because I knew, if he caught me with it on me, it would just disappear along with everything else. Where's it now? With a woman named Constance Whitfield. She was my governess growing up. The only person who ever helped me without wanting something in return. Ren's voice softened, just slightly, around the name. I trust her with my life. I have trusted her with my life for 2 years now. Holt was quiet a long moment, turning it all over. And the man in copper draw, he said finally. The one Pruitt mentioned. Ren's whole body went rigid. You heard about that. Whole town's heard about it. She closed her eyes. That's him, or someone he sent. He's been looking for 2 years. He won't stop. Men like Edmund don't stop, Holt. Not because they still want the woman. Because they can't stand losing. Holt reached over, slow, and took her hand. She let him. You're safe here, he said. You don't know that. I know I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him then, and something in her face cracked open just slightly. Not fully, not yet, but enough that he caught a glimpse of the woman underneath all that careful armor. Thank you for telling me, he said. I should have told you the first week. You told me when you were ready. That's enough. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 2 years straight. There's something else, she said. I never mailed a letter to Constance telling her where I ended up. I was too careful for that. But if Edmund's men are asking, after me by description now, in territories this far west. She stopped. That means he's already narrowing the search. Holt finished for her. Yes. They sat with that a long moment, the mountains gone fully black now against a sky thick with stars, and neither one of them said what they were both thinking. That the 2 valleys of distance between Stone Hollow and Copper Draw had just started to feel very, very small. The attack on Tobias came 11 days later, on a night with no moon at all. He'd stayed late at the Pruitt store, picking up feed that had come in on the afternoon freight, and was riding the last stretch of road back toward the ranch, when the shot cracked out of the dark and took him clean through the shoulder. He didn't fall off the horse. Later, everyone would say, that was the only reason he was alive to tell it. Some stubborn animal instinct kept him in the saddle even, as the pain white-hot bloomed through his whole left side, kept his hand locked around the reins even, as the world tilted sideways, and the horse bolted for home on pure instinct of its own. He made it as far as the yard before he went down. Holt heard the horse first, screaming hooves on hard-packed dirt, faster than any ranch horse should have been moving that late. He was out the door with his boots half-laced, and his rifle already in hand, before Silas even made it out of the bunkhouse. Tobias was on the ground by the time Holt reached him. Blood soaking black, through his shirt in the lantern light. Eyes wide open, breath coming in short, panicked pulls. Someone, Tobias managed, teeth clenched against the pain. Someone in the trees. Waiting. Get Raphael? Holt barked at Silas, already tearing his own shirt into strips to press against the wound. Get the doc from town. Now. Ren was there within seconds, kneeling in the dirt beside Tobias, her hands moving fast, and sure over the wound in a way that told Holt this wasn't the first time she'd had to do something like this. Steady pressure, calm voice, the kind of calm that only comes from having done it before under worse conditions with no one else there to help. Stay with me, she told Tobias, voice low and level even, as her hands worked fast. You're not dying tonight. Do you hear me? Not tonight. Tobias's eyes found hers, and something passed between them, recognition maybe of 2 people who both understood exactly what it cost to survive. I hear you, he rasped. He lived. Barely, and only because the shot had caught muscle instead of anything vital, and only because Ren's hands had known exactly what to do in the 10 minutes, before the doctor's wagon finally rattled up the drive. But the message had been sent, clear as anything. Someone was already here, and they weren't just watching anymore. The following morning, the whole ranch moved differently. Rifles leaned within reach in every doorway. Raphael took to riding the fence lines 2 at a time instead of alone. Silas set a rotating watch on the barn. Through the night, though nobody said out loud exactly what or who they were watching for. Ren barely slept. Holt found her at the kitchen window past midnight, 3 nights running, staring out at nothing, boots already on. You should rest, he told her, the third night, standing in the doorway with a blanket over his shoulders. I can't. Ren. This is my fault. She didn't turn around. You know that. Tobias is lying in that bed with a hole in his shoulder, because of me. That's not. Don't. Her voice cracked, just slightly. Don't tell me it's not true. It is true. Edmund doesn't miss. Not when it matters. Which means that shot wasn't meant to kill Tobias. It was meant as a message. To me. Holt crossed the room, stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, without him touching her. Then we send a message back, he said quietly. We're not running. Not this time. She turned then, finally, to look at him. And for the first time, since the train platform, Holt saw something in her face that wasn't guarded, wasn't calculating an exit. It was fear, plain and unhidden. And underneath the fear, something that looked almost like hope. You don't know what he's capable of. I'm starting to get an idea. Holt. I mean it. He took her hands in his, steady, deliberate. Whatever's coming, we face it together. That was the deal. That's still the deal. She didn't answer, just leaned forward, slow, and rested her forehead against his chest. And he wrapped his arms around her and held on, while the wind rattled the window panes, and somewhere out in the dark, a man neither of them had ever met kept getting closer. Edmund Cross arrived in Stone Hollow 8 days later, and he did not arrive quietly. He came in a hired carriage, the only one anyone in town had ever seen, fine black lacquer and matched horses that looked absurdly out of place against the dust and scrub of the territory, and he stepped down onto the boardwalk in a suit that cost more than most ranchers in the valley made in a year. Pruitt, of course, was the first to know, and within the hour so was everyone else. Holt was in the barn, when Raphael came sprinting across the yard, hat gone, face white. Boss, there's a fella in town. Fancy carriage. Says he's looking for his wife. Raphael swallowed hard. Says her name's Ren. Holt's blood went cold, and then, almost instantly, hot. He found Ren in the kitchen. One look at his face and she knew. He's here, she said. Not a question. Town. Now. She didn't argue, didn't hesitate, grabbed her coat, and within minutes they were on horseback, Silas riding hard behind them, rifle across his saddle. The ride into Stone Hollow felt like riding toward an execution. Ren said nothing the whole way, face set, knuckles white on the reins, and Holt kept his horse close enough to catch her, if she bolted, because he could see it in her, the old instinct, the pull toward flight, that years of survival had carved, so deep into her it might never fully wear away. Don't run, he said low as the town came into view. I'm not running. I mean it, Ren. I said I'm not. They rode down the main street of Stone Hollow, drawing eyes from every window and doorway, and there, waiting in front of the courthouse, with the easy, patient stance of a man, who had never once in his life been told no, stood Edmund Cross. Dark hair, graying handsomely at the temples, cold eyes that swept the street, and landed on Ren with an expression that made Holt's stomach turn. Ren. His voice was smooth, cultured, utterly wrong for the place it was standing in. There you are, darling. I've been so worried. Ren made a sound low in her throat, not quite a word, closer to something wounded, and Holt felt her hand tighten around his, without either of them deciding to reach for the other. You must be Calloway, Edmund said, walking down the steps, with the loose confidence of a predator who'd never had to hurry. Thank you for looking after my wife while she was confused. I'm sure this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Holt said, voice like iron. Ren is my wife, legally married, right here in this courthouse. Ah, Edmund's smile didn't waver. About that. He produced a folded paper, from inside his coat, unhurried, theatrical, the way a man moves, when he already believes he's holding the winning hand. You see, my divorce from Ren was never finalized, which technically makes your marriage. His eyes flicked to Holt with something close to pity, invalid. Holt felt something cold settle behind his ribs. That's a lie. Is it? Edmund's smile sharpened. I'd be happy to let a judge decide. But there's something else you should know, Mr. Calloway. Something rather more pressing than a marriage certificate. He unfolded a second paper. Your father, before he passed, took a considerable loan against this ranch. From my family's holding company. A debt that was never repaid. Edmund's eyes swept over Holt with cold satisfaction. I own that note now. Which means, unless certain arrangements are made, such as my wife returning home with me where she belongs, I am well within my rights to call it due. Silence dropped over the street like a dead thing. That's a lie, Holt said again, but his voice had lost some of its certainty, because he was already running the numbers in his head, already remembering the debts his father had left tangled up behind him. When he died, debts Holt himself had spent 5 years quietly paying down one at a time. Is it? Edmund asked again, almost gently. I have documentation, signatures, bank records. He tilted his head. Do you? Holt's jaw worked. He had nothing. Not on him. Not today. You son of a... Holt. Wren's hand tightened on his arm, steadying him, or steadying herself. Maybe both. Don't. Edmund's eyes moved to her, and something in his expression shifted satisfaction. Maybe, at seeing her still able to be managed, still able to be pulled back into line with a single look. Elena, he started, and Wren flinched at the sound of a name Holt had never heard before. It's time to stop this. Come home. We can put all this unpleasantness behind us. My name is Wren, she said, and her voice, though it shook, did not break. It's been Wren for 2 years, and I am never coming home with you. Edmund's smile finally slipped, just at the edges, just enough to show what was underneath it. We'll see. He turned back toward his carriage, unhurried, every movement calculated to leave the street believing he'd already won. I'll be at the boarding house, he said over his shoulder. I'm a patient man, Mr. Calloway, but not infinitely patient. You have until the end of the week to reconsider. Both of you. The carriage pulled away in a cloud of dust, and the street exhaled all at once, murmurs breaking out on every side, Pruitt already halfway to the nearest gossip he could find. Wren was shaking, not visibly, not in a way most people would have caught, but Holt felt it, in the hand still gripping his arm, a fine tremor running clean through her. He'll do it, she said quietly. He'll call the debt. He'll take the ranch just to prove he can. Let him try. Holt, you don't understand. I understand plenty. He turned to face her fully, right there in the middle of the street, not caring who watched. I understand that man just stood in front of half this town and threatened both of us, and I understand that we are not going to hand you back to him like some kind of debt to be settled. Then what do we do? Holt looked past her, to where Silas sat his horse a short distance off, watching the whole exchange, with the flat, careful stillness of a man already calculating next moves. We stop running, Holt said. We fight him with something better than his own money. What's better than money to a man like Edmund? The truth, Holt said. You have proof, Wren. Real proof. A murdered business partner. Falsified ledgers. That's not a story he can buy his way out of, if it's in front of the right man. And if that ledger proves he's been forging financial documents for years, that debt of his won't hold up either. A man who fabricates one paper fabricates them all. What right man? Judge Renner won't touch this. He's a territorial judge presiding over land disputes and cattle theft. Edmund's the kind of man who eats judges like that for breakfast. Not Renner. Holt's jaw set. Marshal Doyle. Federal marshal out of Fort Grant. Man doesn't answer to territory politics or Edmund's money. If we can get him the proof isn't here. Wren's voice had gone tight. It's with Constance. 2,000 miles from here, Holt. We don't have that kind of time. Then we make time. He took her by both shoulders, gentle but firm, forcing her to look at him instead of past him, toward the carriage still visible at the end of the street. We're done running from him, Wren. We run toward something instead. Toward the marshal. Toward proof. We fight this the right way. She stared at him a long moment, and Holt watched something shift behind her eyes. The old instinct toward flight. Still there. Still pulling, but underneath it, something newer. Something that looked almost like resolve. All right, she said finally. We fight. They left 3 days later at first light, the whole ranch stripped down to a skeleton crew, Raphael staying behind to watch the place, with 2 of the neighboring hands Holt trusted, Tobias still recovering, but insisting on keeping watch from the porch with a shotgun across his lap regardless of what anyone told him. Holt, Wren, and Silas rode north toward Fort Grant and Marshall Doyle, taking the mountain trail instead of the main road, because the main road was exactly where Edmund would expect them to be. It was slower going, rougher, but safer, Holt told himself over and over, as the trail narrowed and climbed into country, where a man could hide an army in the rock formations, and nobody riding past would ever know. He was wrong about the safer part. They were 2 days into the mountains, the trail cutting, through a narrow canyon walled in on both sides by red stone, when the first shot rang out. Came from above, from the rim of the canyon, where a man with a good rifle and a patient nature could have been waiting for hours. The bullet took Silas high in the side, spun him half out of the saddle before he caught himself, and for one long, terrible second, Holt's whole world narrowed down to the sound of his oldest friend crying out in pain. Down! Holt shouted, already hauling on his own reins, already reaching for Wren. Get down! Get down! A second shot cracked off the canyon wall, close enough that Wren's horse reared and screamed, and in the chaos of it, dust and noise and Silas slumping further sideways in his saddle, Holt saw the shape of it happening before it happened. The third shot was aimed at Wren. He didn't think, didn't calculate, just moved, throwing himself sideways off his own horse, and into hers, knocking her clean out of the saddle, and down into the cover of a rock outcropping half a second, before the bullet would have found her. They hit the ground hard, tangled together, and Holt rolled to put his own body between her and the canyon rim. Stay down, he snarled. Stay down. Above them, the shooting had stopped as fast as it started, the shooter either out of clear shots or already moving to a better position. Holt couldn't tell which and didn't have time to guess. Silas! Wren was scrambling, trying to get past Holt toward the older man still slumped in his saddle. Silas! Silas's voice came out ragged, thin. I'm all right. He wasn't. Holt could see that even from a distance, the dark stain already spreading fast across his side. His face gone gray under the sunburn. Get him down, Holt barked. Now, before that shooter gets another angle. Between the 2 of them, they got Silas off the horse and into the cover of the rocks, and Wren's hands were already moving, over the wound the same way they had, with Tobias, fast, sure, desperate, while Holt kept his rifle trained up toward the canyon rim, scanning for any hint of movement. It's bad, Wren said low, not looking up from her work. Holt, it's bad. The bullet's still in there. I can't. Can you slow the bleeding? I can try. Then try. I'll keep watch. Silas's hand closed weakly around Wren's wrist. Girl. Don't talk, she said, voice fierce with something close to panic held just barely in check. Save your strength. Girl. He said it again, insistent, and she stopped, looked at him. His eyes, pale and watery with pain, found hers and held on. This ain't your fault. You hear me? Whatever happens, ain't your fault. Silas. Say you hear me. Her eyes filled. I hear you. Above them, silence had settled, over the canyon rim. Whoever had fired those shots was gone or waiting or repositioning. There was no way to know which and no time to guess wrong. We need to move, Holt said, low and urgent. Now, while we've got the chance. There's an outcrop half a mile down that'll give us better cover, and it's closer to the fort. He can't ride, Holt. Then we carry him if we have to. We are not staying in this canyon. They got Silas back onto his horse, Holt riding close behind to steady him, Wren leading both animals at a pace that was too slow and still felt impossibly fast, every hoofbeat echoing off the canyon walls like it was announcing their position to whoever might still be watching. It took the better part of 2 hours to reach cover good enough to stop and properly dress the wound, and by then Silas had gone quiet in a way that frightened Holt more than any amount of groaning would have. "He needs a real doctor," Wren said, hands trembling now that the worst of the danger had passed, and the shock was catching up to her. "Not out here. A real doctor, Holt, soon. Fort Grant's got one. We push through tonight." "He might not survive tonight." "He'll survive." Holt said it like a fact, like something he could will into being through sheer stubbornness alone. "He's Silas Rourke. He's outlasted worse than one bullet." But even as he said it, Holt didn't fully believe his own words, and neither, judging by her face, did Wren. It was well past midnight, the horses stumbling, with exhaustion and Silas barely conscious against Holt's chest, where he'd taken to riding double just to keep the old man from sliding off entirely, when Wren finally spoke the thought that had been circling behind her eyes for hours. "It's not enough," she said quietly. Holt glanced over at her, confused. "What isn't?" "The copy." Her voice was hollow, flat with exhaustion and dawning realization all at once. "I've been carrying a copy of the ledger this whole time, in my bag. I thought it would be enough if it ever came to this. Proof is proof. And it's not. A copy can be dismissed, challenged, called a forgery by a man with Edmund's money and Edmund's lawyers." She shook her head slowly, the full weight of it settling over her features in the moonlight. "The original, the one in Weatherford's own handwriting, cross-referenced with Edmund's own signatures, that's the only thing that can't be argued away. And that's not with me. It's with Constance. It's with Constance." She looked at him, something close to despair breaking, through the careful control she'd held onto for years. 2,000 miles away, Holt. And Marshall Doyle is not going to move against a man like Edmund Cross on the strength of a copy that any competent lawyer could tear apart in an afternoon. Holt was quiet a long moment, the horse's hooves the only sound in the dark, Silas's ragged breathing warm and shallow against his shoulder. "Then we go get it," he said finally. "Holt, I mean it. We get Silas to that fort, we get him a doctor, and then we go get the original. Whatever it takes. That's Boston, Holt. That's Edmund's territory. That's walking straight back into the one place in this entire country where he has the most power. I know. You could die there. I know that too." She stared at him, and in the pale wash of moonlight, Holt saw something break open in her face. Not weakness, nothing close to weakness, but something rawer than he'd ever seen from her. Something that looked, for just a moment, like she was allowing herself to believe that another person might actually stand beside her all the way, through the worst of it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that? For me?" "Because you're my wife," Holt said simply. "Not because a piece of paper says so. Because I decided it the day I watched you walk into a stall with a killer horse and talk it into trusting you instead of running. Because I've watched you carry 2 years of terror on your back, without ever once asking anyone to carry it for you." His voice roughened. "So now I'm asking, let me carry some of it." Wren didn't answer, couldn't, maybe, just reached over in the dark and found his hand, and held on tight enough that Holt understood the answer, without a single word needing to be said. Behind them, Silas stirred weakly against Holt's shoulder. "Boston," the old man rasped, barely audible. "Lord help us all. Despite everything, despite the blood soaking through the bandages, despite the exhaustion, despite the fear still coiled tight in all three of their chests." A small, disbelieving laugh escaped Wren in the dark. "You're supposed to be resting," she told him. "Can't rest," Silas muttered. "When my fool boss is fixing to walk into a lion's den for love, somebody's got to make sure he don't do nothing stupider than that." They rode on, through the last of the night, 3 shapes moving slow and careful through mountain dark, one of them bleeding, one of them terrified, one of them more certain than he'd ever been of anything in his life. By the time the fort's lights finally broke, over the horizon, gray dawn creeping up behind the mountains at their backs. None of them had said another word. They didn't need to. The decision had already been made back there in that canyon in the space between one gunshot and the next. They were done running from Edmund Cross. Now they were going to walk straight into the heart of everything he'd built and pull it down around him, piece by careful piece, starting with a single sheet of paper, hidden 2,000 miles away in the careful keeping of a woman who had never once, in 2 long years, stopped believing that Wren would need it again someday. The doctor at Fort Grant was a small, sharp-eyed man named Whitcomb, who didn't waste words and didn't waste time. He took one look at Silas Rourke, gray-faced and barely conscious across Holt's saddle, and started barking orders before anyone had even finished explaining what happened. Table. Now, somebody boil water. Wren didn't remember much of the next hour clearly. Just fragments. Silas's boots, still on, hanging off the edge of the surgery table. The lamp swinging slightly with every step Whitcomb took around him. Holt's hand, gripping the doorframe, so hard his knuckles had gone white, and stayed that way. She stood in the hallway, waited, because there was nothing else to do, because pacing felt like giving the fear somewhere to go, and standing still felt like holding it exactly, where it was coiled up tight behind her ribs. Until the door finally opened. "He'll live," Whitcomb said, wiping blood off his hands, with a rag that had seen far worse. Bullet missed anything that mattered. Barely. Wren's knees nearly buckled, with the relief of it. "Barely," Holt repeated. "That's your professional opinion. Barely. My professional opinion, Mr. Calloway, is that your foreman is too stubborn to die properly. Give him 2 weeks and a lot of complaining, and he'll be back to yelling at ranch hands." Silas, somewhere behind him on the table, managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "Told you," he rasped. "Too mean to die." Wren pressed a hand over her mouth, because she was laughing and crying at the exact same time, and she couldn't have said which one was winning. They stayed at the fort 3 days. Long enough for Silas to keep his color, long enough for the doctor to say the word safe to travel, without flinching, though not without a long list of instructions Silas had no intention of following once he was back on a horse. It was on the 2nd day, sitting beside his cot, while he slept off the worst of the fever, that Holt finally said the thing he'd been circling for 2 days straight. "I have to send Wren to Boston." Silas's eyes cracked open. "You have to send her. She has to go, Silas. Constance is the only one who has the original ledger. And I can't leave you here alone, not with Marshall Doyle needing to hear the whole account, from someone who was there in that canyon. So you're staying." Silas's voice was flat. "And she's going. Alone." "She won't be alone. I'll find someone reliable to travel with her." "Boy!" Silas pushed himself half upright against the pane, glaring the way only a man who'd known Holt since he was in diapers could glare. "You're about to send your wife 2,000 miles, into the exact city, where a man tried to kill her once already. And you're going to sit here and hold my hand instead. I need you to think straight, which apparently that woman has knocked clean out of your head." Silas eased back down, breathing hard from the effort. "Doyle can hear my account, without you standing over my shoulder. Go with her, Holt. That's not a request. And leave you here. I've survived worse than a hospital cot and bad coffee." Silas managed a thin, exhausted smile. "Go. Before I get up out of this bed just to kick you toward the train station myself." Marshall Doyle came by the infirmary that same afternoon to take Silas's statement, and stayed long enough afterward to hear the whole shape of what Holt and Wren intended to do. He listened without interrupting, arms crossed, weighing it the way a careful man weighs anything that might cost him his career if he moved too fast. "A copy of a forged ledger won't hold up," he said finally. "Not against a man with Cross's resources. You need the original, and you need it entered into evidence somewhere he can't buy his way around it." He was quiet a moment. "I'll come with you, both of you." Holt looked at him, surprised. "Boston's a long way outside your district, Marshall." Interstate fraud and a murder tied to it crosses district lines the moment the money did, Doyle said. I've got standing to pursue it clear to the Atlantic, if the paper trail demands it, and I intend to make sure it does. Besides, his mouth twitched, something almost like a smile. I've been wanting an excuse to see a man like Cross answer for something in front of a federal bench instead of a bought one. This'll do. Holt found Wren on the porch outside the infirmary, that evening, wrapped in a borrowed shawl against the mountain chill, watching the last light drain out of the sky. I'm coming with you, he said. Doyle too. He's already arranged it. She turned. Silas ordered me to, in no uncertain terms. Something in her face loosened, just slightly, and Holt understood then how much weight she'd been carrying at the thought of walking into that city alone. You don't have to, she said anyway, because some habits, the habit of expecting to face everything by herself, didn't break just because someone offered to help carry the load. I know I don't have to. Holt sat down beside her. I'm choosing to. She looked at him a long moment in the fading light. Edmund is going to be there, somewhere in that city, watching. Let him watch. He won't be watching alone this time. You don't understand what he's capable of, Holt. Not really. Not until you've seen it up close. Then I'll see it up close. He took her hand, steady, unshaking. We're not doing this apart. We agreed. Whatever's coming, we face it together. She didn't argue further, just leaned her head against his shoulder and let the silence hold them both, the mountain wind pulling at the edges of her shawl, the stars coming out one by one, over a fort 2,000 miles from the fight that was still waiting for them. The train east took 6 days, Marshal Doyle riding 2 cars up, quiet and watchful, a federal badge folded into his coat pocket like a promise. Wren spent most of the journey staring out the window, watching the country change beneath her, grassland giving way to farmland, farmland giving way to the crowded gray sprawl of cities she hadn't laid eyes on in over 2 years. Holt watched her more than he watched the scenery, cataloging the way her jaw tightened every time the train pulled into a station crowded enough to hide a stranger. You keep counting exits, he said quietly, somewhere around the 4th day. Habit. Old habit. Or new one. Old. She didn't look away from the window. The oldest one I have. He didn't push further, just reached over and took her hand, and she let him, and for a while that was enough. Boston arrived on the 6th morning wrapped in fog and coal smoke, brick buildings crowding up against a gray sky, streets so thick, with people and carriages, and noise that Wren felt something close to panic climb up the back of her throat the moment they stepped off the platform. Too many people, she murmured, close against Holt's side. Too much noise. Can't tell if anyone's watching, or if it's just the city. We'll be careful, Holt said. We'll be fast. They took rooms under false names in a boarding house 3 streets from the harbor, unremarkable, cheap, the kind of place nobody would think to look for a woman who'd once moved in Edmund Cross's polished, glittering circles. That first night, Wren barely slept, startling at every footstep in the hall, every carriage rattling past outside. The following morning, she wrote a single line on a scrap of paper and had it delivered by hand to an address she still knew by heart, after 2 years of trying to forget it. I need to see you. It's finally time. Constance Whitfield arrived at their boarding house that same evening, veiled and cloaked against recognition, and the moment she stepped through the door and saw Wren's face, she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled her into an embrace that lasted a long, trembling moment. I thought, Constance said, voice thick, I thought you might be dead. 2 years and not 1 word. I couldn't risk it. Any letter could have been traced. I know. Constance pulled back, studying her with sharp, careful eyes. I know, child. I've kept it safe. Every single day, I've kept it safe, waiting for this exact moment, praying it would come, and dreading it in equal measure. You still have it? Sewn into the lining of my good winter coat. Constance managed a thin, exhausted smile. Where else would a proper spinster hide a murder confession? Holt, standing near the window, felt something ease in his chest for the first time in 6 days. "We need it," he said. "As soon as possible. There's a federal marshal willing to act, but only with the original in hand." Constance's eyes moved to him, assessing, the way a woman assesses anyone standing this close to someone she loves like a daughter. "And you are Holt Calloway, her husband." Something in Constance's expression shifted, softened, at the word husband, like she'd been waiting 2 years to hear, that Wren had found someone worth trusting again. "Well," she said, "then I suppose we'd better not waste any more time." Marshal Doyle received them the next morning in a borrowed office 2 blocks from the courthouse, arranged through a federal contact he'd wired ahead to, before they'd even left Fort Grant. He read the original ledger in complete silence. 20 minutes. Nobody in the room said a word the entire time, the only sound the soft rustle of pages, and the ticking of a clock on the wall that seemed to Wren unbearably loud. Finally, Doyle set the pages down. "This is real," he said. "Yes," Wren said. "You understand what this means. If this holds up, and I believe it will, Edmund Cross doesn't just lose a business dispute. He faces murder charges, fraud charges, and if he's forged the ledgers, I'd wager everything else he's put his signature to in the last 5 years is worth a second look, including any note he claims your husband's father signed." Doyle's eyes moved between them. "This is not a small thing you're asking me to pursue." "We understand," Holt said. "He has powerful friends, judges, newspapermen who owe him favors." "We understand that too." Doyle studied them both a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Then we do this properly, publicly, where he can't buy his way out with a quiet word in the right ear." He stood, already reaching for his coat. "I know a judge, who owes Cross nothing, and fears him less. We arrange a confrontation. Witnesses present. Everything documented, everything public, before he has a single chance to make this disappear the way I suspect he's made things disappear before." Wren's hands had gone cold in her lap. "You want me there," she said. "In the room with him. I want the truth in that room," Doyle said, not unkindly. "And you're the one who's been living inside that truth for 2 years. If you're not ready, I'm ready." The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them, and she felt Holt's hand find hers under the table, steady, grounding, and understood in that moment that she meant it. Fully. For the first time in 2 years of running, she meant it. She was ready. The confrontation was arranged for 3 days later, in a private meeting room at the courthouse, ostensibly a routine business dispute hearing, the kind of dry legal proceeding that wouldn't draw crowds or reporters, though Doyle had quietly ensured 2 of Boston's most respected attorneys would be present, as witnesses, men whose reputations Edmund couldn't simply erase with money or threats. Wren spent the morning of the hearing standing very still in front of a mirror in the boarding house room, staring at her own reflection like it belonged to someone else. Because for 2 years, she'd been Wren Halloway, careful, quiet, invisible. And today she had to be Elena Cross again, if only for an hour. Had to stand in a room and let that name, that history, wrap back around her shoulders like a coat she'd sworn she'd never wear again. Holt found her there, unmoving, hands pressed flat against the washstand. "Wren, I don't know if I can do this." "You already are doing it." He came to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You've been doing it for weeks, months. You just haven't been standing in front of him while you did it." "What if he," her voice caught, started again. "What if seeing him undoes everything I've built back together? What if I walk into that room and I'm 24 years old again, and terrified and small, and none of what I've become in the last 2 years matters at all once he's standing in front of me?" Holt turned her, gently, until she was facing him instead of the glass. "Then I'll be standing right beside you," he said. "And when he looks at you and tries to make you small again, you let him see exactly how much you're not. Not anymore." She closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. "All right," she said. "Let's go." The meeting room was smaller than Wren had expected, wood-paneled, heavy curtains keeping out most of the gray morning light. Doyle stood near the head of the long table, two attorneys seated to one side, with careful, professional expressions. Constance sat near the back, veil lifted now, jaw set with quiet, furious resolve. And Edmund Cross sat at the far end of the table, exactly as composed as Wren remembered, exactly as untouchable-looking, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most families in Stone Hollow saw in a year. His eyes found hers the moment she walked in, and for one terrible, suspended second, everything in her wanted to turn and run, because he still had that look, that particular patient cruelty dressed up as charm, because some old, animal part of her still flinched at the sight of him the way a hand flinches from a stove it's been burned on before. Until she felt Holt's hand settle at the small of her back, steady, unwavering, and she made herself walk forward instead of back. "Elena," Edmund's voice was smooth as ever. "You look well. Frontier life must agree with you." "My name is Wren." "Of course." His smile didn't move. "Marshal Doyle tells me there's some business matter to discuss. I confess I'm rather curious what could possibly warrant dragging me away from my work for a, routine hearing." "Sit down, Mr. Cross," Doyle said. "This won't take long." Edmund sat, unhurried, the easy composure of a man who still believed he was untouchable, which he had been. For years he had been. Doyle nodded once toward Wren, and Wren understood in that moment that this was hers to do. Not the marshal's, not Holt's, hers. She stepped forward and set the original ledger on the table in front of Edmund, open to the page she'd memorized down to the last figure 2 years ago, in a rented room 2,000 miles from here, the night she'd finally understood exactly what she was carrying. "Do you recognize this handwriting?" she asked. Edmund's eyes dropped to the page, and for just a fraction of a second, so brief that, if she hadn't spent years learning to read his every flicker of expression, she might have missed it entirely, something in his face went very still. "I've never seen this before in my life." "That's Weatherford's handwriting," Wren said, voice steady, louder than she'd expected it to come out. "His own accounting, cross-referenced against your signatures on the transfer authorizations. Right here." She tapped the page. 3 years of money moved out of the company and into accounts he never knew existed. He found it 2 weeks before he died. "This is a fabrication." "Is it?" She didn't blink. "Then explain the signatures, Edmund. Explain why they match every document your own attorneys filed with the shipping registry that same year. The same hand that signed a false loan note against my husband's ranch, I'd wager, if anyone cared to compare them side by side." Edmund's composure cracked, just slightly, at the edges. "You have no idea what you're accusing me of." "I have every idea," Wren said, "because I lived it. Because you tried to make sure I never told anyone, and when that didn't work, you spent 2 years trying to find me instead, and you very nearly succeeded, but instead of getting me back, Edmund, you led me right here. To this room, with every piece of proof I needed, finally in one place in front of a federal marshal who isn't afraid of your money." The room had gone utterly silent. Even the attorneys, seasoned and unshockable, had stopped moving their pens. "This is absurd," Edmund said, but his voice had lost its smooth edges now, gone thin and sharp instead. "I'll have my own attorneys examine this so-called evidence. I'll have it dismissed as forgery within the week." "You can try," Doyle said calmly, "but you'll do it from a jail cell, Mr. Cross. I have more than enough here to hold you, while the courts sort out the rest. And once this ledger is entered, as evidence, every other document bearing your signature gets examined right alongside it. Including that ranch note." Edmund's eyes swept the room, fast, calculating, the look of a man realizing all at once that every exit he'd counted on had quietly closed, while he wasn't watching. His gaze landed back on Wren. "You ungrateful." He was on his feet now, chair scraping back hard against the floor. "I gave you everything. A name. Place in society. And this is how you repay it. Digging up ancient lies to destroy me." "You beat me," Wren said, and her voice didn't shake, Not once, not on a single word. You murdered your own partner and let the whole world believe it was a robbery. I'm not destroying you, Edmund. You did that yourself years ago. I'm just the one finally saying it out loud. Edmund's hand moved fast, faster than anyone in that room expected, from a man who'd spent his whole life letting other people do his violence for him. A pistol, drawn from inside his coat, leveled straight at Wren, before Doyle or the attorneys had even fully registered what was happening. Because he'd known, somewhere in the back of his calculating mind, that this moment might come. Because a man like Edmund Cross always kept one option left in reserve. "Sit down," he snarled, voice cracking now, all the smooth polish gone. "All of you, sit down or so help me." Holt moved before conscious thought had even caught up with instinct, stepping directly between the gun and Wren, close enough that the barrel wavered against his own chest instead. "Holt?" Wren's voice broke on his name. "You want to shoot someone?" Holt said, low and dangerous. "You're going to have to go. Through me first. Move." "No." Edmund's hand shook, just slightly, the pistol wavering between fury and something that looked, underneath it, almost like panic. A man who had never once in his life had to actually pull a trigger himself, always letting money and threats and hired violence do that work for him instead. And in the space of that hesitation, that single trembling half-second, where Edmund's whole carefully constructed world was collapsing faster than he could think his way out of it, Wren moved. Fast, sure. The same steady precision she'd used walking into a stall with a killer horse, the same stillness she'd learned surviving a marriage designed to make her small. Her hand shot out and struck Edmund's wrist upward, hard, the pistol firing wide, into the ceiling in an explosion of plaster, and noise that seemed to shatter the whole room open at once. Doyle was on him before the echo even finished, wrestling the weapon free, forcing him down against the table, while the two attorneys scrambled backward, and Constance let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a shout. "There's another one," Wren said, breathless, already moving. "In his boot. He always keeps a second." Doyle's hand found it exactly, where she said it would be, and within moments Edmund Cross, murderer, embezzler, the man who had haunted 2 full years of Wren's life, was on his knees on a courthouse floor, hands bound, all that smooth composure finally, completely gone. "You'll regret this," he spat, glaring up at her, with something raw and ugly twisting his handsome face. "You'll regret every part of this." Wren looked down at him, and for the first time in years, she felt nothing at all like fear. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think I will." The room settled slowly into stunned quiet, Doyle issuing sharp orders to the 2 deputies who'd rushed in at the sound of the gunshot. Edmund hauled to his feet and marched out, still shouting threats that landed on nobody, the attorneys already murmuring to each other about depositions and formal charges. Constance crossed the room and pulled Wren into her arms, both of them shaking now that the danger had finally passed. "You did it," Constance whispered. "Child, you actually did it." "We did it," Wren corrected, and reached back for Holt's hand, finding it already waiting for hers. Holt looked down at her, something fierce and proud, and overwhelmed all tangled together behind his eyes. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "You stepped in front of a loaded gun for me. Seemed like the thing to do." A laugh escaped her, shaky and disbelieving, half tears mixed in with it. "You could have died. So could you." He tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face, gentle. "Guess we're even, then." The formal charges took most of the following week to finalize: murder, fraud, attempted assault on top of everything already documented. Doyle's attorneys, working from the ledger, traced the forged signature straight through to the loan note Edmund had waved in front of Holt back in Stone Hollow, and by the end of the week a federal examiner had declared it fabricated in every particular. The same hand, the same ink, the same lie told twice. The debt was voided. The ranch and everything Holt's family had built on it was safe. Their marriage, contested for exactly as long as it took one judge to read through the divorce decree Edmund had apparently never actually filed, one more lie among so many, was declared entirely, unquestionably valid. There was one more piece of business before they could finally turn west and go home. A letter arrived at the boarding house 2 days before they were set to leave, forwarded through 3 different addresses before finally catching up to them, the handwriting on the envelope achingly familiar, though Holt hadn't seen it in 5 years. Emmett. Holt sat with it while before he opened it, Wren beside him, her hand resting quiet on his knee. The letter was short. His brother had heard, somehow through channels neither of them could guess at, about everything that had happened, Wren, Edmund, the ranch nearly lost to a false debt. He wrote that he was working a mine claim in California under his own name now, no longer running, no longer hiding from what he'd done. That he'd been sending money back for 2 years to a family in the territory, whose father had died in that old land scheme quietly without ever telling anyone, trying in whatever small way he could to make right what could never fully be made right. He wrote that he was sorry, that he understood if sorry wasn't enough, that he hoped someday when Holt was ready, they might speak again. Holt read it twice, folded it carefully, set it down on the table between them. "He's trying," Wren said softly, watching his face. 5 years too late. Maybe, she took his hand. Or maybe exactly on time. Some things take exactly as long as they take, Holt. I know. He looked at her a long moment. Something in his chest, some old, hard knot he'd been carrying, since his father died, loosened just slightly. "Maybe," he said finally, "when we're settled again, I'll write back. I think that's a good place to start." The train ride home took 6 days, same as the trip east, except everything about it felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the aching exhaustion in both their bones. Wren slept properly for the first time in longer than she could remember, her head resting against Holt's shoulder, as the country rolled by outside the window, farmland giving way to grassland giving way, at last, to mountains rising blue and familiar against a wide Wyoming sky. Silas was waiting on the platform. When they arrived, still favoring his injured side, but standing on his own 2 feet, Tobias and Raphael flanking him, with grins wide enough to split their faces. "Well," Silas said, looking them both over, "you two look like you've been to war." "Something like it," Holt said. And it's done," Wren said. "All of it. He's not coming back. Not ever. And the ranch is safe. The debt was as false as everything else he ever signed his name to." Silas's shoulders dropped, some old tension finally leaving his whole frame at once. "Good," he said, voice rough. "Good. Now get on home. That black horse of yours has been raising hell every single morning, waiting on you." Onyx greeted Wren the way he'd learned to, over the past weeks, ears pricked forward instead of flat, nose pressed soft, and warm into her open palm the moment she stepped into the corral. No trace left of the screaming, terrified animal that had once nearly injured a man for coming too close. "Look at you," she murmured, resting her forehead against his neck, breathing in the familiar smell of hay and horse and home. "Look how far you've come." Behind her, Holt watched from the fence rail and understood, without needing to say it aloud, that she wasn't only talking to the horse. That night, after the ranch had settled, and the hands had wandered off to the bunkhouse still trading stories about Boston, Holt and Wren sat together on the porch, the mountains fading slowly, from gold to purple to black against a sky already scattering itself with stars. "Do you regret it?" Wren asked quietly. "Any of it? What it cost you?" Holt thought about the question honestly, the way he always did, with her now, no easy answers offered up just to smooth things over. "I regret that Silas got shot," he said. "I regret every single night you spent scared of a knock at the door. But the rest of it," he shook his head slowly. "No, not one piece of it. You're my family now, Wren. This," he gestured between them, the porch, the mountains, the whole quiet life they'd built, and nearly lost, and fought their way back to, "this is worth everything it cost." Wren leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the last light fade completely from the sky. "I used to think," she said softly, "that survival was the only thing I was ever going to get, that I'd spend my whole life just staying one step ahead of being destroyed, and call that enough because it was all I thought I deserved. And now," Now I think, she said, that I finally understand the difference between surviving something and actually living through it. Between running from what scares you and standing still long enough to fight it properly. She turned her face up to his. You taught me that. You and a half-wild horse who decided one afternoon that maybe not everyone in the world wanted to hurt him. Holt smiled, slow and warm, and reached up to brush a strand of hair back from her face. The same gesture, echoed now from a courthouse in Boston to a porch in Wyoming, except this time there was no fear left underneath it. Nothing left to run from. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'd send that same 4-sentence letter again tomorrow. Every single word of it. If it meant getting exactly this. Wren laughed, soft and real, the sound carrying out over the dark ranch yard like something finally set free. Even the part about no poets and no dreamers? Especially that part. He pulled her closer against his side. Turns out I got both anyway. Just took a while to notice. Somewhere out in the corral, Onyx nickered once, into the quiet night, settling in for sleep, and the whole ranch went still with something that felt, unmistakably, like peace. Not the peace of hiding, not the fragile, watchful quiet of a woman who slept with her boots beside the bed, ready to run at the first sound of trouble. Real peace, earned peace, the kind that comes only after you've finally stopped running long enough to turn around, stand your ground, and fight for the one thing worth keeping. Home.